6:39, let's have a look at some of the newspapers for you this morning. We'll start with The Times. It has concerns from European and American generals over Britain's dwindling army size.
The Daily Mail reports on the UK being gripped by a measles crisis.
The Mirror has Tata Steel's decision to cut nearly 3,000 jobs.
And The Guardian leads with the potential destruction of key environmental and health protections following Brexit.
The Express has Esther Ranson's call for a parliamentary debate on assisted dying.
And joining us now to go through some of those headlines and all of the stories inside as well, Deputy Editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers, and Deputy Editor of The Spectator, Cindy Yu. Lovely to see you both.
Morning.
Right, let's start with the story, because we've been talking about it already, and I must say our viewers, thank you very much for getting in touch, have really got...
Not happy.
No, not happy about this at all. Fraser, it's the Channel migrants being given the right to work.
So there's a Home Office scheme that's been operating on the quiet. I think that is part of the problem, that allows essentially asylum seekers, I think after a year, to start working in certain jobs. Now, I think actually there isn't anything that wrong in principle with asylum seekers working. In many ways, it's preferable to them not doing very much, sort of languishing on these waiting lists, only being given a sort of £50 stipend a week. But the way the scheme is set up, I think, seems really problematic. The fact that they are being allowed to work for 80% of the going rate, undercutting wages, which I think is a big gripe that people have about immigration, understandably. And the other thing is that they're living in state-subsidised housing. You know, one thing about migration is that you kind of expect people to pay their own way. You know, they're not citizens. They haven't necessarily contributed into the welfare pot, so to speak. Should they be given subsidised housing if they're working? I think, so in many ways, yes, OK, it's reasonable, I think, for asylum seekers to have work, especially if they've been on this waiting list for so long. But on the other hand, you know, is it undercutting wages? Is it taking up resources in a way that it shouldn't from, you know, other communities?
Cindy?
Yeah, I think Fraser eloquently puts out the case against and the problems with the system, but I actually think, you know, I hold a different view on that, because when it comes to, for example, 80% of the pay, these are areas in which we have massive shortages of labour already. You know, these are the care homes, these are the fruit pickers, you know, all of these things that are designated shortage occupation lists by the government. Remember, this is the post-Brexit immigration system where the government can designate these occupations. So we need more people in these areas. And I would suspect that the Home Office thinking, you know, paying 80% is better than paying them full of what they could get, you know, if they were in the marketplace.
But then what we don't know, or don't appear to know at this stage, is what percentage of their housing costs they're having to pay.
So the Telegraph reports that is a contribution. We don't know how much that is contribution. But just on that second point that Fraser makes, you know, these are people who have been on the waiting list for more than a year, but haven't actually been given the right to stay.
Well, on that
So
point...
they're not in the market of houses, of in the wider society, as it were. So we can't really let them go find landlords.
That point is addressed by Jenny, one of our viewers this morning. She said, I'm really concerned about this. How are background and criminal record checks carried out when these people have no proof of their identity?
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that
after a year they still haven't been processed.
Well, I think you can probably prove your identity, but without proving your asylum claim is justified. If you
Criminal
see what I mean.
record check?
But you can get CBD checks anyway for any one job. You can get like a particular check just for that particular job you can get. That doesn't... Well, just because the government can't decide if you should stay in the country doesn't mean they can't decide if you're a criminal or not, if you see what I mean. But as an asylum seeker, you have to prove that you have a justified claim to stay in the country. You might not be a criminal, you might just be an economic migrant, and so for the government not to give you that kind of right.
It worries me about social care work.
Chris says, another one of our viewers, Chris says, do you want your very infirm and vulnerable elderly relatives being looked after by Channel migrants who have chosen to break the law to get into the UK?
Well, I think the problem with the asylum system, and one of the many problems, is that you, in order to be even considered for asylum, you do have to be in the UK. So, you know, that is inherently broken. It means that people do have to enter illegally. Clearly, it would be much better if we could process people from abroad. And we do actually, you know, when there are specific wars and incidents, you know, we actually do this quite well. I think, you know, you find very few people who disagree with, you know, the letting in people from Hong Kong or from Ukraine or things like that. But I don't know why we don't take this approach more generally. Why can't we decide before someone arrives, before they make either that treacherous journey or, you know, go over a tourist visa or whatever it might be, however they might be staying here. Why can't we do that before they get here? And that would, I think, get rid of a lot of these problems, and it would get rid of the fact that, yes, you know, many of these people are not genuine asylum seekers, but we just don't know until they've been processed.
No, I think that's a valid point. The Home Office just needs to get its act together with this. How it is so difficult, I don't know. Cindy, let's have a look at the front of the Mail, should we? We periodically, over the years, we have these sort of, I don't know if it's fair to call them anti-vaxxers or, but you know, they decide they're not going to vaccinate the children. And as a result, then, several years later, we get these outbreaks, and now they're concerned about measles at the moment.
Yeah, they're concerned about measles at the moment. The ideal coverage rate is about 95% of children, but in some areas of the UK, it's only about 80% or just over 80%, which means that actually, you know, you're left with hundreds of cases. Now, measles, 1 in every 5,000 children die. So it's actually quite a lot, you know, if it was allowed to spread quite a lot. And we thought that it had been eradicated. But, you know, as you say, Stephen, if people stop vaccinating their children, it comes back pretty quickly. And there's actually a really sad quote from a mum whose 6-year-old died from measles because she didn't vaccinate him and how guilty she feels now. You know, it's terribly sad. But anyway, the health services are warning that, you know, we're slipping towards that if we don't, you know, start to have more
Well, the
coverage.
thing is, I suppose we've been protected from measles for so long now. I think the vaccine came in the 50s or something, didn't it? That there's generations now who've never experienced it. And
Don't realise how serious it is.
it's a killer, measles is. So is rubella. I mean, the MMR vaccine is measles, mumps and rubella. And rubella is an insidious, horrible disease because if you get it and you infect somebody who's pregnant, they will give birth to a deformed baby. It is that dreadful. And the MMR vaccine is very, very safe.
Yeah, and it's interesting that there are, you know, this is a problem not just among children, but among a certain cohort of adults, you know, people actually... basically, the sort of Wakefield generation, as they've been dubbed in the press.
Andrew Wakefield.
After Andrew Wakefield, the anti-vax doctor, published this highly misleading and now, you know, totally debunked claim that the MMR jab causes autism. But they were saying in Birmingham, you know, there are many teachers who don't have the jab because they were part of that generation. And, you know, you can't blame the parents because in that case, because actually, you know, it was the mainstream media who were making a lot of the claims about, you know, saying that the vaccine wasn't safe. It was trusted sources. And even Tony Blair wouldn't say whether his children
had been
vaccinated. So, you know, I think sometimes it can be easy to point the finger at sort of anti-vaxxers and say, oh, you know, they're stupid, idiots, conspiracy theorists, whatever. I mean, I'm sure some are. But, you know, in the case of MMR, this was a much wider problem.
Well, and teenage boys, measles, infertility.
Is that right? Yeah.
And yeah, it's not just, you know, 1 in 5,000 children might die, but a significant number end up in hospital, have lifelong complications. So, you know, the case for vaccination is absolutely overwhelming.
Yeah.
And the other thing happening with this as well is our increased Muslim population, you know, to put it candidly, because there are pork derivative parts of certain vaccines, but they're vegan alternatives. So, you know, Jenny Harris, the head of the Health Service, is keen to emphasise that. But, you know, for some Muslims, they're worried about, you know, using a vaccine that's got pork components in there, basically.
Right.
But as you say, there are alternatives.
Yeah.
The point is to be willing to talk to your doctor about alternatives.
Talking to medical people, Dame Esther Ranson, she's pushing for an assisted dying laws, and it's quite a strong front page of the Express, Fraser.
Yes, this is Esther Ranson, who, you know, very tragically, it's not got much left to live. She's been very candid, saying that she's, you know, become a member of Dignitas and she plans to have an assisted death. And she's saying that we should change the law in the UK to, you know, to liberalise our own system. I think, you know, I think it's important to say that I think Esther Ranson has slightly misrepresented the position of the UK. There have been about 530 people in the last 10 years who have gone to Dignitas. And none of them have been, and none of their family members and no one in connection has actually been arrested for this. And actually, there was a sort of change in how we prosecute these things thanks to Keir Starmer around 10 years ago. He changed the guidance on this. So I think there's a little bit of scaremongering about what you are.
Yeah, but that's
and
only if you
allowed
can
to
afford
do.
to go to Dignitas.
That's true, and it costs, you know, £10,000 or something on average to go to Dignitas. So it's something that's only available for, you know, people who have lots of spare money. She's calling for a parliamentary debate. I think there's nothing wrong with having a parliamentary debate, but it has been debated in Parliament many times over the years, and I think quite sensibly MPs have decided that it's probably just a bit too dangerous to liberalise these things, because it's very difficult to safeguard against abuse. And we've seen in certain countries, I think particularly Canada, where you start off with what seems like a very limited law. In Canada, it started off where you can only have assisted dying if you're at imminent risk of death, you have a terminal illness. Very, very quickly, lawsuits come in, it expands. I mean, soon you're going to be allowed to have an assisted suicide simply if you're suffering from mental health problems. Now, I don't know what the difference is between that and a normal suicide.
No, apparently in Canada they've got some quite young teenagers who are insisting on their right for an assisted death.
Yeah.
Based on the fact that they just don't like living anymore.
And it seems as if
depression, in other words.
If someone wanted to, you know, jump off a bridge, I hope you would save them. But if they say, well, I want an assisted suicide, we say, go ahead. I think that raises some serious moral questions.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, that is the issue with this. I'm not against it per se, but it's when you look at all the caveats that need to be brought in.
And I saw an interview with a disabled man recently who has, you know, been in really dire straits, mentally speaking, and is now much, much better. And he basically said, you know, if this was available to me at my worst moment, I would have taken it. But I'm so glad it wasn't available to me. And so it's just cases like that that make it very, very difficult. Because I'm like you, Stephen. You know, I think that people should, if you know, so people commit suicide, they just do. And to give them the certainty, you know, that nothing's going to go wrong if you need to do that, you know, it's such a difficult issue, isn't it? But then with some cases, you know, you don't want them to be feeling pressured or feeling that they can't get over this hump or whatever it is. But I think what's interesting is the Keir Starmer point that Fraser was mentioning, because, you know, if Labour win this year, which is very, very possible, very maybe even probable, then this debate, I think, will come back into Parliament, and it is a vote of conscience. So there's no party whipping going on. The last time it was voted on was 2015. It's been what? That's 9 years since it's last been voted on. So it's possible that a debate happening after a Labour government comes in may well pass laws like this.
And that's almost equally worrying. You worry on both sides of the argument, don't you?
And I think in Scotland are looking at doing this separately as well to the UK. So it could be something that, you know...
Well, which would prove to be ridiculous, actually, because you just end up people just going
to
north
Scotland.
of the border.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. It's very difficult. Very difficult, very difficult. Cindy, let's have a look at Prince Harry, should we?
Yeah. Yeah, slightly more cheerful. It's always fun to talk about Prince Harry and his numerous legal fights. So Prince Harry has decided to abandon a libel case he was levelling against the Mail on Sunday. The Mail on Sunday, this is over this bodyguard debate, basically. The Mail on Sunday had reported that Prince Harry didn't offer, had got spin doctors, basically, to get the public on side with this battle over whether or not the Home Office should provide him bodyguards in the UK. And Harry, just at the last moment yesterday, dropped the claims.
When they had to produce the evidence.
When they had to produce the evidence. So he's never had to produce the evidence, and he now faces a £750,000 bill to lawyers on both sides because it's not going to trial anymore. I mean, I think this is just one of the numerous cases that he's trying to go through with.
Bringing a libel case in this country is one of the most expensive things you could possibly do, and he's just learned that, hasn't he?
Yeah, and you know, he is this man that goes to court at the drop of the hat, it seems. I can't remember exactly which case, because he's suing so many different newspapers all at once, but, you know, there was one case where he didn't quite have the evidence. He was hoping that the trial would uncover the evidence, which is extraordinary in a sort of civil case. It's almost unheard of. You know, the problem for Harry is obviously he gets a tough time in the press. Then that means that he, largely because he's quite dim, unfortunately, so he gets a tough time in the press. Then that makes him angry with the press. You know, he wants to, go after suing everyone or calling for newspapers to be regulated and shut down. and then that just makes the press quite understandably even more hostile. So he has played the game very poorly. If he wanted the press to leave him alone, this is not the way to go about it.
I think it also sounds like he's been possibly not exploited necessarily, but taken advantage of by lawyers. You know, lawyers who have
Yes,
really
the lawyers
feasted,
should surely have warned
lawyers
him.
have really feasted on these press claims in the aftermath of the hacking scandal. Are definitely saying to him, you know, you've got a case here, you've got a case there, you've got a case there. And for, as Fraser says, you know, for someone who's grown up with this animus against the media, lots of things to be angry about justifiably, and lots of conspiracy theories about how the media works, then you've got these lawyers kind of confirming these things because they're charging by the hour.
Well, even to be fair, even if he's approaching them and saying, I want to bring this case, they should be looking at the evidence and saying, this isn't going to...
Well, it's possible in this case, you know, at the last minute they said, you know, we just don't think
We just don't have the evidence to disclose.
Yes, exactly. We just don't know what he didn't want to come to light in trial, basically.
Yeah, OK. Look, Fraser, Cindy, thank you both. We'll see you a little bit later on. Let's see what the weather's going to do for you today. Here's Annie.